Israeli Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu is in Washington today. He is set to begin talks there on brokering a second phase of his country's ceasefire with Hamas. Now, this week will be Trump's first meeting with a foreign leader since returning to the White House in January, something Netanyahu called a testimony to the strength of the Israeli-American alliance. We're going to talk more about all of this with Doug Herbert, who joins me on the set. Doug, Netanyahu got into D.C. Sunday night. Today, he's going to be talking with Trump's Middle East envoy, Steve Witkoff. Are both men on the same wavelength, would you say? Yes and no. Publicly, they're going to look like they're on the same wavelength. What we hear coming from the meeting will probably make it look like they're both reading from the same play sheet. In reality, look, they have different imperatives here, right? Witkoff is Trump's guy. Netanyahu is under growing pressure, let us say, from the right-wing members of his coalition to basically resume the war after this first 42-day phase of the ceasefire ends, right, leading into a new ceasefire. And this is also the day when new negotiations are expected to open on what comes next in the second phase, right? Now, Hamas is very much still present in Gaza, despite Netanyahu all along saying that he would eliminate them as a political and military entity. They are still very much on the ground. We've seen them in recent days. And they were saying they are threatening that there will not be more hostage releases. All those remaining hostages, which are supposed to come out in the second phase, that won't happen unless there is a permanent ceasefire and the complete withdrawal of Israeli forces from the territory of Gaza, that is back onto Israeli soil. So Hamas still in a position making demands, pressure on Netanyahu to actually resume the war because in the right-wing coalition says until you eliminate Hamas, this war is not done. Hostages or no hostages, even though everyone wants to get them home. So it's very difficult. And like I said, Witkoff, the Middle East envoy, is Trump's man. He is the guy that has to apply pressure on Netanyahu to end this war because that is the remit given to him by his boss, Donald Trump, who is the man who said in his inaugural speech that he is there to end wars, not to start them, to bring he doesn't want to be any part of this. So it's a really difficult round of negotiations going through. But like I said, the optics are going to be, they look like they're on the same page. We're not going to perhaps see on full-blown public display the big differences, although it will probably leak out and we'll hear about it on the sidelines. And to make things even more complicated, just ahead of Netanyahu's trip to Washington, Iran actually spoke out against Trump's proposal to relocate Palestinians from Gaza to neighboring countries. Yeah, you'll remember this idea that Trump floated last week, basically seeing Gaza as a demolition site, right, a wreck. He's like, just clean out the whole thing, meaning the whole strip. Move presumably hundreds of thousands of Palestinians from this devastated strip. Move them where? To the neighboring countries, to Jordan and Egypt. Just one hitch here. Jordan and Egypt want absolutely nothing to do with that plan. Remember, Jordan already houses, tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of Palestinian refugees on its soil. Egypt also thousands of Palestinians on its soil. They do not want that. What do Jordan and Egypt and other regional neighbors, including, Hamas itself as well, the U.S.'s regional allies, they all want the same thing. They want to see Palestinians remain on their land as they see it and have self-determination. This is what Iran's foreign minister was basically talking about. He said that the Palestinians need to be there, self-determination. They're essentially endorsing a two-state solution, a solution which would have the Palestinians remaining in Gaza, somehow united with the West Bank eventually, in some sort of unified governing Palestinian entity yet to come somewhere down the road. Like I said, they want nothing to do with Trump's plan, and very strong words from Iran's foreign minister saying that not doing this, relocating Palestinians, would amount to, quote, ethnic cleansing. We've heard similar sentiments expressed by others recently, but those are rather strong words coming from Iran, weighing in with its 2 cents on what they are rebuking Trump very much for this proposal. Doug, you mentioned the West Bank. Obviously, there's a ceasefire that's holding now still in Gaza. However, Israeli security forces are continuing their military raids in the West Bank, which is home to some 3 million Palestinians, a military operation that's raising concerns from the UN, among others. Yeah, the UN is calling what's going on right now in the West Bank an unnecessary and disproportionate use of force by the Israeli forces. Now, the Israeli forces, as they have since day one, will continue to assert that they are rooting out what they say as armed Palestinian groups, that terrorist entities that pose a direct threat to Israel's national security, and that they are simply conducting operations. They have absolutely no choice in doing this, taking all precautions to spare civilians in doing so. The fact of the matter is there has been an absolute surge in the West Bank, in violence in the West Bank, since the early days of this war. But we've seen these continuing what are military raids on the ground, military force on the ground, but also airstrikes, especially focused around one of the hotbeds, if you will, of Palestinian militancy, resistance to the Israeli occupation, the Jenin refugee camp. You've seen thousands of people displaced from that camp, and you've seen at least 25 according to the Palestinian news agency Wafa, you've seen at least 25 militants, Palestinians killed in these raids in recent days, I think since January 21st, so we're in the 14th day now of this intensified phase. At least 25 killed, dozens more injured, like I said, thousands displaced, and this is what is really raising the hackles of the international community and the UN prominently, because they say that what's happening right now in the West Bank, these continued raids, remember, away from Gaza, but still Palestinians, 3 million Palestinians living there, what's happening there could have an impact and affect the staying power of the very fragile ceasefire in Gaza itself. I'll just note that Donald Trump, among his opening actions in office, did lift the U.S. sanctions against violent Israeli settlers who committed violence against Palestinians. Joe Biden had imposed sanctions on that settler violence against Palestinians. Donald Trump has lifted them. Doesn't mean that Israel has a blank check, but it does mean perhaps in the eyes of this Trump administration, it might be perceived as having a freer hand to conduct its military operations and to have perhaps what some see as its proxies, the violent Palestinian Israeli settlers, who the Israeli army would say, we have nothing to do with their violence, we do not condone it at all, but some would see as their proxies in conducting operations against Palestinian militants.